Tonight's story takes us to a village, nestled in silence, where life moves slowly under the gaze of loudspeakers, where morning began with government voices and ended with quiet thoughts. No one dared speak aloud. This is the gentle story of a woman living in North Korea, where daily life was a routine of dignity, patience, and hidden hope. Before we begin, make sure you're comfortable, take a deep breath, and if you enjoy soft stories like these, please subscribe, like the video, and let us know in the comments what kind of history helps you fall asleep. Now, close your eyes, and let's step into a time where even silence had weight. The sun had not yet risen when the village roofs began to glow faintly with a promise of light. Everything was gray and blue, like the color of faded memories. The dust in the air hadn't yet stirred. The cicadas were still sleeping, and deep in a thatch-roofed house just shy of the footpath, a woman named Janae opened her eyes before the first sound of the loudspeaker cracked the silence. Her body rose, but slowly, carefully, as though waking too quickly might draw attention, even from the walls. The room around her was small. The window was shuttered, and outside, a chill still rested over the cracked earth, like a thin veil. She sat upright on the straw mat. No mattress, just the flattened padding of decades. Her eyes moved to the ceiling as if reading the cracks for instructions. Then, she adjusted her collar. White, folded, neat. In the corner, her son, little Minho, still slept, curled like a comma beneath the quilt she had sewn from old cloth, dyed in brown tea, and stitched by quiet moonlight. Janae didn't move toward him yet. First, the routine. First, the rituals. She tied her long hair back with a cloth strip, then rose to touch the folded uniform hanging beside the door. It was old, a little patched at the elbow, but it had to look proud. In North Korea, dignity was not a feeling. It was an expectation. Her first task was the fire. She crouched by the hearth, gently pulling straw from the bundle in the corner, careful not to disturb the loose earth's floor. She did not speak. She did not sigh. She simply coaxed flame from ash and wood and patience. The pot was filled with barley water the night before. She stirred it silently, letting the steam rise and fill the air with something that almost smelled like warmth. In the distance, the sound came. Like the crowing of a rooster you never liked, but couldn't live without. Janae bowed slightly, just once, then continued stirring. Minho stirred, blinking against the cold. He didn't speak either, only sat up and scratched at his thin arms. His mother turned and nodded to him softly. He rose. A small bowl of porridge was ladled into a chipped ceramic dish. No kimchi today, no egg, just barley water thickened overnight. It was food. It was quiet. It was enough. They sat on the floor together. Cross-legged Minho didn't ask for sugar. He didn't ask why the loudspeaker spoke again. He just ate. And Janae kept her eyes on the window. Across the village, other fires were beginning to breathe smoke into the air. Soon, the street would fill. Not with noise, but with purpose. "Comrade," came the soft greeting, more breath and voice. Janae bowed her head slightly in return. The village was still poor. The roofs were sagging. The fields weren't fertile this year. But no one complained. Not aloud. Complaints had a way of walking further than the speaker. In the distance, children sang the national anthem in schoolyards. Women rinsed laundry in icy basins. And Janae made her way toward the work detail assigned to her, scrubbing tiles at the local health post, or perhaps sweeping the school's entry path again. She liked the sweeping. It was rhythmic, predictable, quiet. As she moved through the village path, her feet brushing against the dust, Janae passed a large painted mural. It showed the great leader smiling beneath golden wheat, his arms outstretched. In the image, children laughed and danced. Birds flew above his head. Janae paused. Not out of AU, but out of habit. She bowed, and then continued walking. The village dog barked in the distance. A farmer's voice rose, then fell. Somewhere, a kettle whistled. Everything was in place. But inside Ginny's mind, there was another rhythm, a question, a memory. A time when the fields were greener, or maybe just a time when she was a girl with wind in her sleeves, and not yet so many rules to follow. She didn't dwell on it. She just swept, again, and again, and again. The dust on the village road was fine and light, like powdered clay. It rose gently around Ginny's steps, but not enough to leave a trail. In a place like this, trails were not encouraged, neither were questions. Just clean shoes, lowered eyes, and a proper stride. The sun was still low in the sky. It bathed the red flags above the rooftops in a dull orange glow. There were no birds singing. Not here, not lately. Only the distant hum of power lines and the steady rhythm of her own quiet footsteps. Janae walked with a woven basket tucked under her arm. Inside it, folded neatly, were gray cloths for cleaning the health post floor. Her assigned duty this week. She didn't mind the task. Scrubbing gave her something to do with her hands, something that didn't require answers or explanations. The floor, at least, did not ask questions. The village's health station stood 2 blocks from her home, past a ration shop and the school. Its whitewashed walls were chipping. A poster of the leader hung just inside the door, the corners curled with age. But not daring to fall, a woman in uniform greeted her with a nod, expressionless. You may begin, Comrade Janae. That word, comrade, was used often, like salt in every sentence. It could mean respect, or a warning. It could mean nothing at all. Janae accepted it without emotion. She knelt beside the wooden floorboards, unwrapped her cleaning cloth, and dipped it into the bucket of warm water provided earlier that morning. The warmth surprised her. A kindness, perhaps. Or maybe the water just hadn't cooled yet. She began to scrub, slowly, in long strokes. Back and forth, back and forth. Her breath matched the motion. Her thoughts wandered, but only gently. She thought of Minho, seated in his classroom now, reciting lessons in unison with 20 other children. Thought of whether his shoes had held up through the walk, or if the seam had split again. She would sew it again tonight, if needed. Comrade, said the woman again, interrupting her quiet thoughts. Scrub by the window. That's where the inspector passed yesterday. Janae bowed her head and obeyed. No protest, no sign of tiredness. Her knees ached against the wood, but she said nothing. The rag squeaked faintly as she worked. A good sound, soft and clean. Outside the window, a man on a bicycle passed slowly, upright, with his back perfectly straight. A group of 3 women carried baskets of weeds toward the compost site. One looked over her shoulder before turning a corner. Even their glances were measured. The inspector, she knew, would come by again this afternoon. Not for her, exactly, but for the health post, for the floor, for the records. For whatever reason they chose that day, Janae finished the last plank by the door, wrung out the cloth, and stood slowly. Her back protested but did not speak. She folded the cloth neatly, bowed once more to the woman behind the desk, and stepped outside. The wind had picked up just a little, enough to rustle the sleeve of her tunic. She walked back toward the ration center. Her card was tucked inside her waist sash, barely peeking out. She would queue like the others, one by one, single file, no words, unless spoken to. The ration clerk sat inside a booth with smudged glass and glanced at each card with bored precision. You'll have bean paste today, the clerk muttered, and 2 rice bricks. No oil, no salt, no extra cloth, just the same as yesterday. The same as last week. Janae took the parcel without complaint. It was wrapped in coarse paper, tied with twine. She slipped it into her basket and moved aside. No one met her eyes, not out of cruelty, but habit. Eyes were windows, And in this place, windows stayed shut. Back at home, she set the parcel down carefully. Her fingers brushed the edge of a family photograph. Her own mother, younger than Janae was now, standing with pride beside her husband in a worn but polished uniform. The photo was faded, the corners curled. She paused, then smoothed it gently with her palm. The midday broadcast began, not from the main loudspeaker, but from the small square box mounted in the corner of her home. It could not be turned off. Its voice was lower now, more ceremonial. Let us remember the day of foundation. Let us remember the strength of our people, forged in discipline and pride. Janae stirred the leftover barley water again. She would stretch it for the evening meal, maybe add a spoonful of the bean paste for flavor. She turned and looked at the folded quilt on Minho's bed. It would return by sunset. His teacher would walk them halfway, then return to the school. A routine they all knew by heart. In the corner of her room, a small paper flower sat on a shelf. Something Minho had made last year during the New Year performance. Colored with crayon, its edges curling now. He had made it for her, and she had saved it, hidden from the damp. She smiled. Just slightly. It was the first time her face had changed expression all day. Outside, a neighbor passed again, pushing a cart. "Comrade." The voice came soft. "Formo." Janae replied the same. They walked past each other like shadows. The light had shifted slightly by the time Janae stepped outside again. The sun hovered higher in the sky now, but the heat that came with it was thin and quiet, barely warming the rooftops. Dust drifted like ash in the wind. A bird flew low across the courtyard. Silent, wings wide, back in her home. The radio box in the corner had fallen silent again. For now, its emptiness echoed louder than its voice. Ginny's hands, now dry and faintly cracked from the morning's scrubbing, moved over the cloth napkin as she unwrapped the ration bundle. The bean paste was firm and dark. She scraped it carefully into a glazed clay jar near the hearth, then rewrapped the paper and folded it for reuse. Nothing was wasted. Not food, not thread, not time. She poured a shallow bowl of water, dipping a cloth to clean her face, then gently smoothed down her hair again. There were no mirrors in the home, only the polished tin on the wall, warped and dim. But she knew what was expected of her reflection. Neat, orderly, proud, and behind her eyes, silence. The midday break passed slowly, as if every minute chose to walk instead of run. Janae sat on the low stool near the doorway, her hands folded in her lap, listening to the soft murmur of the village breathing. It wasn't a loud place. Even children knew to speak in whispers. Even footsteps tried not to echo. From across the narrow alley, Aneva, old Mrs. Byung, stepped out to tend to her clay pots. She walked with a slight limp, leaning gently on a carved stick. The woman nodded to Janae, who returned the nod. No smile, just acknowledgement. "They say the potatoes might come early," Mrs. Byung whispered, almost to herself. Janae let the words settle between them like falling leaves. She gave a slight nod. "If the soil is kind this year." The words felt bold, almost personal. Mrs. Byung did not reply. She just stirred the top of her pot with a wooden spoon and moved back inside. Janae stood and turned toward the back wall of her home, the side that faced the shared courtyard. There, against the faded concrete, hung a wall of drying herbs, cloth strips, and twine. She began her afternoon chore, sorting, checking for rot, untangling knots. Each movement was slow and rhythmic. Her fingers worked as though they remembered something older than the regime. A mother's teachings, or perhaps a grandmother's hands that once moved the same way. Tug unwind, coil hang. A breeze swept through the doorway. It carried the faint smell of ash, dry earth, and soy broth from a neighboring pot. For a moment, it felt like a memory from a different life, though she couldn't say when or from whom. Minho would be back soon. She took a shallow tin cup from the shelf and filled it with water. Then she stepped outside, squinting into the sun, scanning the dusty road. A group of children were walking back toward the village now. Some in pairs, some alone. Most were quiet. One or two whispered under breath. She saw him a little smaller than the others. Red scarf tucked neatly. Satchel bouncing against his hip. He saw her too, but didn't wave. Just walked faster. Once inside, he placed his shoes in the corner and bowed slightly. "Amma," he said softly. She nodded. "Welcome home." No hugs, no laughter, just closeness in quiet form. She took the satchel and opened it. A folded assignment sheet. No marks yet. His handwriting, tidy and strong. She looked it over, then smoothed the creases before placing it on the table. "Did you eat at lunch?" she asked. He nodded. "Rice and cabbage. No meat." She didn't expect meat. Neither did he. She took the last rice brick and crumbled it gently into a shared bowl. Added a spoonful of bean paste. Stirred it with hot water until the scent rose gently into the air. Earthy, familiar. They sat cross-legged once again. 2 bowls. 2 wooden spoons. Eating in silence. Outside, the sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched across the homes like long fingers reaching toward evening. That night, after washing their bowls and folding the linens for sleep, Janae sat by the window for a moment longer. She watched the dusk settle in, the rooftops turning gray, the light bleeding from the alleyways. Minho was already under the quilt, curled like a quiet thought. In the distance, the loudspeaker crackled again. "The people's unity is our greatest weapon. We are strong together. We are eternal." But she had stopped listening to the words long ago. She looked up, between the broken slats of wood in the ceiling. A single star blinked through, pale, faint, uncertain. "But there," she breathed, and then lowered the shutters. Evening in the village came not with color, but with a slow fading of sound. There were no street lights, no golden glow pouring from windows, no chatter, no clatter, just a hush that settled like a blanket over rooftops and soil. The light dimmed into the walls, and the walls accepted it without question. Inside her small home, Janae moved quietly, her bare feet brushing across the hard floor. She lit a wick in a shallow clay bowl, soaked in leftover oil from weeks ago. The flame flickered hesitantly, casting soft light against the cracked plaster. It was not bright, just enough to see the bowl she held and the stitches she began to make. Beside her, Minho lay beneath the patched quilt, already in his... He didn't speak, but watched his mother with sleepy eyes. Lids half closed, arms curled under his chin. She sewed slowly, the needle whispering through the cloth like wind through pine. It was a small repair, the corner of his satchel, worn from dragging across dusty paths. She had no thread left in color, so the stitches would be visible. But neatness mattered more than appearance. "Amma," Minho whispered, voice barely there. She looked up. "Yes, my little pine branch. Why are there stars only sometimes?" She smiled softly. It was a question not forbidden, only rare. One without fear in it. "Some nights the sky wants to be alone," she answered gently. "And some nights it shares." He nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Outside, the village dogs barked once, then fell quiet. A bicycle creaked past, somewhere far off. A spoon clinked against a bowl. Janae folded the satchel and set it aside. She reached for the comb, carved from bone, passed down from her own mother, and began slowly combing Minho's hair, smoothing the day from his scalp. Each stroke was long and slow, careful not to pull or startle. He sighed, not in complaint, but in comfort. The comb moved again, and again, and again. Soon, his breath deepened. She placed the comb aside and adjusted the quilt over his shoulder, tucking the frayed edge beneath his arm. Her fingers rested there for a moment, a pause, a stillness. Then she stood and returned to her sewing. Outside, the loudspeaker had gone silent. That meant the generator was off, or that the district had ended its nightly announcements. Either way, silence was a blessing. She used it to listen, not for words, but for signs. The way the wind knocked gently at the shutters, The way the neighbor's footsteps paused by the well, the distant rustle of someone pouring water into a tin basin. Signs of life, signs of rhythm. She dipped her fingers into a shallow dish and rubbed the stiffness from her knuckles. Sewing made her hands ache now, more than it had 10 years ago. But still, she worked. By the time the moonlight filtered through the cracks and the shutters, the village was still. No shouting, no music, no stories shared out loud, only thoughts, soft and internal, like shadows that moved without light. Janae reached into a box beneath her sleeping mat and pulled out a folded cloth. Inside, carefully wrapped, was a letter. It had no address, no stamp, no name, only a line written in her own hand many years ago. If ever the winds turn in our favor, meet me by the eastern hill. She had written it once, then never again. Not to send, not to give, just to keep. She unfolded it now and read the words again, slowly, softly, as though reading them aloud would bring the hill closer. Then she folded it back, returned it to its hiding place, and lay down on the mat beside Minho. Her eyes closed, but her thoughts did not sleep. Outside, the sky was clear. A handful of stars watched over the village. The earth held its breath, and in a small home, lit by a flickering oil flame, a woman and her son drifted into sleep without questions, without tears, only the quiet hush of endurance. The first sound was not the birds, not footsteps, not even voices. It was a soft click of Ginny's fingers as she folded the corner of her blanket, a motion she had practiced every day for years. The stillness of the early hour was complete, as if even the air had not yet decided to stir. Through the closed shutters, the dawn light pressed, like pale rice paper against the walls. No direct sun, just glow, muted and steady. She rose from her mat in slow, practiced movements, careful not to rouse Min. Her joints ached as they always did. Her knees protested, but she never paused long enough to listen to pain. Instead, she smoothed her collar, straightened her cuffs, tucked her hair into its cloth tie and turned toward the water basin. The cold water stung her fingers. She didn't flinch. Her face, once splashed, came alive, not with emotion, but with readiness. A mirror was not necessary. The expression she wore had long been memorized. Not too hard, not too soft, just ... Correct. She ladled water into the clay pot and placed it above the hearth. A curl of steam began to rise. Outside, the first broadcast had not yet begun. This moment, before the voice of the state, was sacred in its own quiet way. She peeled a slice of dried radish from a string hanging by the window, chopped it into thin ribbons, and stirred it into the barley water. A humble broth, but warm, and Minho would eat it without complaints. He stirred as the scent filled the air. "Good morning, Emma," he whispered, rubbing his eyes. She didn't answer with words, just a gentle touch to his shoulder and a nod toward the wash basin. He knew the routine. He folded his quilt, set his shoes by the door, washed his face quickly and dried it with the clean corner of the shared cloth. Then he joined her at the low table, where 2 bowls waited, the barley broth steaming lightly, the spoons placed just so. They ate in silence. It was not a silence of distance, but one of preservation. The walls had ears, perhaps, or perhaps the habit had simply taken root so deeply that conversation no longer reached the lips. After breakfast, Janae tied Minho's scarf, red, stiff, and a little faded at the edges. "Speak clearly," she said softly, but only when asked. He nodded. "Walk straight." Another nod. "Keep your hands in your lap during reading hour." He blinked once in understanding. Then she handed him his satchel, patched but ready. He slipped on his shoes, stood by the door, and bowed slightly. She returned the bow, not low, but meaningful. He stepped out into the morning air, and she watched him until he turned the corner. Then she closed the door, not with fear, not with grief, just with routine. Today was inspection day, not of the health post this time, but the community grounds. Every home was required to send one representative for morning cleaning, sweeping the main path, weeding the courtyard edges, arranging the red flags, and ensuring the leader's image at the gate was spotless. Janae arrived with her broom in hand, joining a line of women who all wore similar expressions: blank, patient, purposeful. They worked without speaking. The flags were unfurled, stiff with dust. One of the younger women, barely in her 20s, stepped out of line to retie a ribbon that had come loose from the signboard. She adjusted it twice, not perfectly, and stepped back in place. A man with a notebook approached. He said nothing, only scribbled. Everyone saw. No one looked. Janae swept the edges of the pathway, letting the dry leaves collect into neat piles. She bent carefully, collected them in her basket, and poured them into the compost trough at the corner of the lot. The inspector passed behind her once. She did not turn. When the task was done, the women stood in rows as a brief address was read aloud. It came from a sheet of paper, read by a woman with a flat tone and square shoulders. The unity of our village reflects our love for the leader. A clean path is a clean conscience. A sharp uniform is a sharp mind. The women nodded once, in unison, then dispersed. Back home, Janae knelt beside her mat and opened a bundle she kept hidden within her wardrobe. Inside were the small tokens she had kept over the years, objects with no official use but private meaning. A paper fan, creased and faded, painted long ago by her younger sister before she had moved to the capital. A small pebble shaped like a heart, given to her by Minho when he was 4, and a square of embroidered cloth, the last piece sewn by her own mother, passed to her just days before she vanished. During the grain requisition years, she touched each gently, as if their touch might unbury sounds long forgotten. Then she folded them back, and the bundle disappeared again. Outside, a light breeze stirred the cloth banners. The voice on the loudspeaker returned. Long live the memory of the martyrs. Long live the strength of our people. Janae returned to her stove, adding a splash of water to the soup pot. She wiped the wooden spoon dry and hung it from its hook. There was nothing to do now but wait for Minho's return. Wait for the next sound. Wait for whatever tomorrow asked of her. That afternoon, the wind changed slightly, cooler, though the sun still hung over the village like a paper lantern inside her home. Janae swept the floor once more, not out of necessity, but out of habit. The broom moved slowly, like the pendulum of a quiet clock, pushing dust toward the door and then away again. There was no rush, no deadline, only the rhythm of daily motion. She finished her sweeping, folded the cloth from beneath the water basin, and paused. Her eyes rested on a corner of the room, the one she rarely looked at in daylight. It was just a space. A curtain hung over the wall, but behind it, hidden in the dim oil lamplight, was the memory room. That's what she called it, only to herself. She rose and crossed the room. Her fingers trembled slightly as she touched the cloth, lifting it slowly. Behind it, a small wooden chest sat against the wall, half hidden in shadow. She opened the lid quietly, revealing the few items that had not yet been claimed by years. Now, she smoothed its crease again with gentle fingers. The last object she held was the book. It no longer had pages with titles or dates. The front cover was missing entirely, but inside, pressed between the fragile, almost translucent sheets, was a single line written by hand. To remember is to resist. It wasn't her writing. She didn't know whose it was, but she had kept the page anyway. A knock at the door pulled her from thought. Not loud, not hurried. Just 2 soft taps. She rose carefully, slipping the memory objects back into place, covered them with the linen, drew the curtain, and returned to the door with a steady heart. When she opened it, a young girl stood there, one of the neighbor's daughters, barely 9. She bowed politely and extended a note. For tomorrow. Instructions from the district. Janae nodded. Thank you. The girl bowed again and left. The note was plain, typed, folded, unsigned. Inside, it listed names, tasks, times, Ginny's name was third on the list, assigned to cleaning duty for the school's assembly hall. She memorized the time, burned a note in the hearth. The paper curled quickly into smoke and vanished. By the time Minho returned from school, the sun had lowered behind the rooftops. His steps were slower today, his face unreadable. "Everything all right?" she asked. He shrugged. "Teacher was quiet today." She tilted her head. "Quiet like angry, or quiet like tired?" He paused. "Quiet like listening." That told her enough. She nodded and didn't press further. Instead, she stirred the evening broth and added a thin slice of turnip. They ate as always, quietly, carefully, with their backs straight and ears open. After the meal, she gave him his sewing kit. 2 buttons were missing from his coat. "You try this time," she said softly. Minho took the needle with furrowed concentration. His hands were small, but careful. The thread wobbled, slipped, then caught. Janae watched, neither correcting nor rushing, just breathing beside him, letting the moment stretch between them like young. Later, as night deepened, Janae stood once more in the doorway. She looked up. Tonight, no stars, only clouds, soft and heavy, moving slowly over the village, like unseen thoughts. She closed the door gently and whispered to herself. Some nights, even the sky stays hidden. The morning began with an odd stillness. Not silence, but a kind of hush that felt too practiced, too expectant. It wasn't the same quiet Janae was used to. This was a stillness that came before something. The kind that waited. She felt it in the air the moment she woke. The bowl of water for washing had already gone cold, though she had filled it the night before. A small thing, but everything meant something. She dressed more carefully than usual, smoothing the folds of her tunic twice before tying the sash. She took extra time to clean Minho's collar and polish his shoes with a scrap of linen and rice water. Her fingers moved gently, with a mother's patience and a villager's caution. "Will there be loudspeakers today?" Minho asked softly. "Always," she replied, "but maybe louder." He didn't ask more. The assembly hall stood in the center of the village, a large, square building with whitewashed walls and a single row of windows along the top. Inside, the air always smelled of damp wood and the faint trace of mildew, though no one ever mentioned it aloud. That day, every child from the school was brought in early. Rows of chairs lined the main room, each one placed exactly 2 feet apart. On the wall, a banner had been hung. "Our strength is in obedience." The words were bold, the fabric new. A fresh coat of paint had been applied to the podium, still glistening under the harsh bulbs. Janae, assigned to floor duty, entered with a broom and began sweeping from the far corner inward. She worked in long, even strokes. Her mind did not wander. Not today. Other women came and went, dusting windowsills, straightening chairs, laying down red paper on the walkway where the district officer would enter. Everything had to be exact. There was no music, no laughter, only the hum of quiet preparation and the occasional footstep echoing too loudly. By mid-morning, the hall was full. The children sat perfectly still, hands in laps, eyes forward. Their red scarves had been tied with special care. Minho sat in the second row, spine straight, blinking slowly under the harsh lights. Janae stood by the side wall, arms folded neatly in front of her. The broom leaned behind her legs. She was not to be seen, only present, like a shadow. A door opened near the front. A man stepped inside. He wore a gray uniform and a pin on his chest. Not a local, not from their district. His smile was fixed and practiced, a curve without warmth. The children stood in unison, bowed once. "Comrades," he began, voice sharp and smooth, "you are the future of this great nation. The eyes of the leader are with you, watching with pride." He spoke for a long time, praising discipline, celebrating silence, warning against carelessness. "Even a single disobedient tongue," he said, "can rot the body of the people. But I know your tongues are strong, loyal, useful." Jenny's stomach was still, not from fear that had become too familiar to feel, but from a kind of bracing, as if her ribs had pulled tight to hold her still. When the man finished speaking, a child was called forward to recite a poem. Janae recognized the boy. His name was Sukjae, and he had been Minho's seatmate last term. He recited without hesitation. His voice did not tremble. The room was still when he finished. Then came the clapping. Not too fast, not too loud. A rhythm everyone knew by heart. 3 slow claps, then silence. Then the children stood. Then the song began. Janae did not sing. She only listened. The children's voices rose in unison, not joyous, not mournful, just practiced, like leaves blowing in the same direction. She watched Minho's lips move. She watched his fingers clutch his satchel strap. She watched his eyes, focused on nothing in particular. The song ended. The bell rang, and the day somehow continued. After the assembly, she waited by the side entrance to walk Minho home. They did not speak until they had turned down the narrow alley, away from the crowd. "You sang well," she said quietly. "Thank you, Emma." He kicked a pebble with his shoe. It rolled once, then stopped. "Is it good to speak like that?" he asked, not looking up. "It's good to speak carefully," she replied. "And clearly, only when needed," he nodded, as though storing that thought somewhere. They walked the rest of the way in silence. That evening, after supper, Minho returned to his drawing paper. Janae watched as he carefully sketched a scene. A river with stones, a tree bent in the wind, and a small house with smoke curling from the chimney. In the sky above the house, he drew a tiny bird. This time, it wasn't flying away. It was perched on the roof, wings folded, watching. She didn't say a word. She just reached over, brushed a crumb from his cheek, and tucked his pencil gently behind his ear. The next morning came without fail, a gray light crawling over the rooftops like smoke. It was neither warm nor cold. Just there. Just another day. Janae stirred early. Her joints creaked faintly, but she moved with practiced grace. The basin water had collected a thin film of dust overnight. She skimmed it off and used the rest to rinse her hands. A simple breakfast. Dried cabbage, steeped in warm water, soft and quiet, was prepared as Minho dressed for school. They did not speak much. The memory of Assembly Day lingered, though neither of them named it aloud. "You have your satchel?" "Yes, Amma." "The writing book?" "Yes." "Good." "Walk straight." A nod. Then Minho stepped into his shoes and bowed slightly at the door. She watched him leave, the red scarf around his neck fluttering once in the breeze, before he vanished around the alley bend. And then she turned to her morning work. The trees behind the greenhouse hadn't changed much. A small clearing waited just beyond, its soil cracked but still shaded by a single low-branched tree. She paused there. Not long, but long enough to feel the quiet settle around her like a shawl. From her pocket, she pulled a small object, a wooden button, round and plain, carved years ago by her father from a leftover broom handle. She used to keep it in her coat until the fabric wore thin. Now, it lived in her apron. She rubbed her thumb across it once, twice, then tucked it back away. "For when I forget," she murmured. A gust of wind stirred the leaves above. The branches shifted, revealing a small carving in the bark. An old mark, faded but still there. 2 small initials, hers and her sister's. "For when you return," she whispered. By the time she came back to the greenhouse, the sun had shifted. Work resumed. Soil was packed, seeds checked, and new rows marked with sticks and thread. Not a single word about her absence was spoken. That evening, she returned home to find Minho waiting outside the door, sitting with his knees drawn to his chest. "You're early," she said, brushing dust from his hair. "School ended after cleaning. No songs today." No songs. She did not ask why. Inside, the kettle boiled. The warmth spread through their little space, and they ate a thin porridge made with leftover barley and a sliver of sweet potato Janae had brought home from the greenhouse. Minho seemed quiet, but calm. His fingers traced the edge of his bowl absently. He said at last. Yes, my little pine branch. If you were a bird, would you fly away? She looked at him for a long moment. Then she answered softly, only if you came with me. He nodded, as if the answer settled something inside him. That night, after he had gone to sleep, Janae sat by the doorway with the oil lamp beside her. The flames sputtered once, then steadied. She opened a small book. Its pages nearly blank. She had written one thing inside, just one. Every quiet day is a kind of courage. She read it again. Then, gently, she turned the page and left it blank for tomorrow. The day began like most others. Sky pale with cloud light. The air tinged with wood. Janae woke before the bell, her hands already reaching for the kettle before her mind caught up with him. Outside, the narrow path behind the house was damp with early dew. She stepped carefully, feet wrapped in worn cloth shoes, the bucket in her hand light and familiar. She walked past a bakery window, still closed, past the health post with its fading poster, past the last stone fence, and then beyond, toward the far edge of the village. She rarely ventured so far anymore. But today, she carried a reason. At the edge of the fields lay a narrow stream, shallow and winding, flanked by tall reeds and whispering grass. It wasn't grand. No one called it a river except the oldest villagers, who remembered when it ran deeper, faster, fuller. To Janae's, it was simply a breath of space, a sliver of before. She crouched near its bank, dipping the bucket slowly into the cool water. The reflection of her face trembled with the ripples, soft and unreadable. She remembered coming here as a girl, not to fetch water, but to listen. Her mother would bring her and her sister during summer when the days stretched long, and the men were away building rail lines. The river listens best, her mother would say. Today Janae spoke nothing aloud, but the water still listened. As she walked back, the bucket now full, she heard movement behind the reeds. She paused, not from fear, but habit. Listening, a girl stepped out, perhaps 13, in a dark tunic and scarf. Her cheeks were flushed from walking, her arms full of kindling. They locked eyes. Janae nodded slightly. The girl nodded back, then passed without a word. That was how it was. Silence was the language, and the language was survival. Back at the house, she filtered the water through cloth, poured some into the cooking pot, and the rest into a basin near the window. Minho returned from school earlier than expected, the soles of his shoes dusty, his collar slightly askew. "Amma," he said, "they gave us new pens. Ink pens, plastic ones. Black. We're to write a pledge tomorrow." She stirred the pot slowly. "Do you know what to say?" "I memorized it. It's about loyalty." He sat cross-legged on the mat and pulled out his writing book. His fingers traced the edge of the cover absent-mindedly. "May I write something that's just mine first?" he asked, not quite meeting her eyes. Janae turned from the stove. "Yes. Use the back pages." His eyes lit up briefly, and he began to write. She didn't ask what it was. That was trust in its quietest form. As the afternoon wore on, Janae went to the wardrobe and retrieved a box wrapped in cloth. From it, she drew out a single object, a button carved from apricot wood, the last from her mother's coat. She hadn't shown it to Minho before, but today she placed it in his palm. "It's just a button," he said softly. "Yes," she smiled, "but it remembers more than it looks." He nodded, holding it close to his cheek for a moment, then hiding it in the fold of his shirt. That evening, as dusk fell, they sat by the window with tea warm between them. Outside, children's footsteps echoed in the alleyways, and the loudspeaker hummed in the distance. "Amma," Minho said, "do rivers forget?" She looked up at the sky, beyond the roofline, streaked with quiet color. "No," she said, "they remember everything, even when we stop listening." The village had a rhythm, not fast, not loud, but steady, like breath. Each day wound forward with the same soft repetition. Fetch water, cook rice, fold laundry, sweep the path, bow to the portrait. But every now and then, Something would knock once, just once, against that rhythm. This morning, it was a visitor, not a loud one, not uninvited, just unfamiliar. Janae had been scrubbing the floor when she heard the knock, soft, measured, as if testing the wood for permission. She rose slowly, wiped her hands on her apron, and opened the door. A woman stood there, older, perhaps in her late 60s. Her eyes were sunken but alert, and her shoes bore the thin dust of long roads. She wore the standard gray tunic, but the hem had been mended in delicate, almost elegant stitches. "Comrade," she said politely, bowing. "I was told I might find lodging here tonight." Janae blinked. Visitors were rare, lodgers even more so, but she bowed in return. Of course, she made a place by the stove, a folded mat, a ladle of warm barley water, and a small basin for washing. The woman thanked her without excess and removed her shoes neatly by the threshold. Minho watched silently from his stool in the corner, his school books closed but still in his lap. The woman glanced at him. "Your son," Janae nodded. "How old?" "8," she replied. The woman's eyes softened slightly. A good age, still new enough to dream, old enough to listen. Minho looked down at his shoes. They did not speak of names, not yet. Instead, Janae prepared a modest meal. Fermented greens, dried radish slices, and broth made from barley scrap and onion. They ate quietly. The guest was slow, precise movements, as if used to measuring each gesture. Afterward, the woman helped fold the bowls and wash them at the basin without being asked. "You've traveled far?" Janae finally asked. "Far enough to know every road is just another silence." The answer was strange, but not threatening. They fell into silence again. That night, the woman slept beside the hearth. In the morning, she woke to find a small scarf folded beneath her head as a pillow. Later, over breakfast, Janae asked, "Would you finish this hem?" The woman smiled, took the tunic, and they sewed together, side by side. Two sets of hands, moving in mirrored rhythm. No more words were needed. At dusk, the guest packed her things. She left behind no luggage, no bundle, just her scarf, her shoes, and a folded piece of paper. Janae found it after they'd gone. It read, "Keep the quiet safe," and beneath it, in delicate ink, a name she did not recognize, or maybe had long forgotten. Minho tugged at her sleeve. Who was she? Janae folded the note slowly and tucked it into the folds of her tunic. "A whisper," she said softly. "Just passing through." He nodded, and the day began again. But something inside the house, something unspoken, had changed. The floor seemed warmer, the air just a little easier to breathe. That morning, the sky wore a dull hue, pale gray, as if painted in ash. The village square lay quiet, its dirt paths still damp from the night's mist. The loudspeaker hadn't buzzed yet, but everyone walked a little faster than usual. Eyes down, breath short. Janae buttoned Minho's coat as he stood by the doorway. She tugged the fabric gently at the shoulder. "Your sleeve's getting short." "I've grown." "Yes, you have." She smiled faintly and smoothed his hair, which never quite stayed down. He looked up at her with soft eyes, then stepped into the morning. Later that day, Janae left the house with a quiet purpose, a worn cloth bundle under one arm and a pair of broken shoes in hand. They weren't hers. They belonged to her neighbor, Mrs. O, who hadn't left her house in weeks since falling ill. Her son had tried repairing the soles with wire, but they had come apart again in the last rain. Janae had promised to take them to the shoemaker, not for payment, not for favor, just because kindness still had room to breathe. If you let it come softly, like a folded note passed beneath a door. The shoemaker's hut stood near the edge of the old workshop row, a low building with faded red paint and a small bell above the door that never rang anymore. Inside, it smelled of glue, leather, and dust. Master Cho, the shoemaker, sat behind his table, his round spectacles perched at the edge of his nose. He was a quiet man, almost 60, who had once made parade boots for the local officers. But now, his work was mostly patches and stitches, Janae bowed. Comrade Cho, I brought these. She set the shoes gently on his bench. He looked at them, picked one up, turned it over in his hand. Mrs. O's boy. Yes. He nodded. No more questions. I'll have him ready tomorrow. No charge. Thank you. She reached into a bundle and placed a small wrapped item beside the shoes. A wedge of dried persimmon from her cupboard. He raised an eyebrow. This costs more than the repair. And eat half and give the other half to someone lonelier. He didn't smile, but his shoulders softened. Come back at dusk tomorrow. She bowed again and left. Outside, the wind had picked up, stirring the red dust along the path. Janae paused by the corner shop and exchanged greetings with a rice lady, whose hands were always powdered white. No one lingered, but no one turned away either. She stopped at the old bulletin board by the school gate. The notices were the same as always. Loyalty March next Thursday. Children's choir rehearsal mandatory. Volunteer names for orchard duty. But tucked beneath the last paper, almost hidden, was something strange. A scrap of cloth, folded small, pinned by a thumbtack. Janae stared at it for a moment. Was it a message, a forgotten handkerchief, or just wind playing tricks? She didn't touch it. She simply memorized the shade, a deep plum purple, and walked on. That evening, Minho came home with ink on his fingers and a torn page in his book. You wrote your pledge? Janae asked. He nodded, and afterward, we drew trees. What kind of trees? He hesitated. All the same kind. They told us to make sure every tree looked the same. She didn't speak. She only reached out, took his inky hand, and gently wiped his fingertips with a soft cloth. Real trees don't listen, she whispered. What? They grow the way they need. He thought about that, then smiled. A little. That night, after Minho slept, Janae sat at the doorway and opened her small sewing kit. She pulled out a needle, not to sew, but to mend the lining of her thoughts. She thought of Mrs. O's quiet eyes, of Cho's cracked hands and quiet gift, of the plum-colored cloth pinned to a wall, and she thought, quietly, some things still grow, even in silence. The dawn slipped over the village like a blanket pulled slowly across a sleeping child. No announcements yet. No footsteps. Only the faint clink of a kettle being moved from the hearth. Janae stirred barley into boiling water, slow and careful, the way her mother had once done. Minho still slept, his cheek pressed softly into the blanket. Outside, frost lingered in the alley corners. She'll let him rest. Today, there was no school. A self-study day, they called it, which really meant an extra cleaning shift for the teachers and one less cup of hot tea at the office. For the children, it meant home. And sometimes, questions. Mid-morning came with light conversation. Minho had risen, eaten, and now sat at the small table with his workbook open and pencil in hand. Amma, he asked, without looking up. Yes, little one. Do you think the leader reads books? She paused. Not from fear, but from thought. He is said to know everything, but does he read them or just know them? A small smile crept to her lips. Books and knowing are not always the same thing. He nodded thoughtfully, then flipped a page. A torn edge at the back caught his eye. This book had something written before, he whispered. Look. He tilted the page toward her. There, faint under the official print, were pencil lines. Long faded, the strokes formed a sentence, though some parts were smudged, it read. Some days, the sun still remembers our names. Janae blinked slowly, then lowered her voice. Don't copy that, because it doesn't belong on paper anymore. But it's beautiful. I know, she said gently. That's why it must stay hidden. After lunch, Janae let Minho help with sorting dried roots. They sat together on the floor, hands moving in small motions, separating the ginseng from the burdock, placing each strand on a cloth square. Amma, where do old books go? Some are burned. Some are buried. Buried like people, she nodded. Words have ghosts too. Some you bury because they hurt. Others, you bury because you're not allowed to keep them. Minho thought about that for a long while. Then he picked up one particularly twisted root. This one looks like it's dancing. And just like that, the heaviness softened. That afternoon, the sky turned warmer. A rare thing. Janae opened the window and let fresh air roll in. She placed the workbook back on the shelf, but not before folding the corner of that hidden page. Not tearing it, not erasing it, just folding it. To protect later. While Minho napped, she prepared rice dough for tomorrow's dinner. The flour stuck to her wrists, the kneading motion rhythmic and steady. She thought of her sister again, of afternoons spent reciting forbidden poems under a broken beam in the school attic. Her sister's laugh, bold and too loud, echoing across memory. Janae pressed her palm into the dough and whispered softly, "The sun still remembers your name." That evening, when the loudspeaker crackled to life, the announcement was brief. Inspection team arriving Friday. Clean uniforms. Perfect speed. The voice was measured, mechanical. Expected. Janae sighed through her nose. Not fear, just preparation. She helped Minho fold his tunic and polish his shoes. "Will they check our notebooks?" he asked. "Only the front pages," he nodded. And beneath the blanket, she knew, he kept that folded page close to his heart. Outside, the frost began to return. Inside, the lamp glowed steady. Janae sat near the window, her sewing in her lap. In the quiet, a thought passed through her like a breeze. Some people survive only because no one notices them. And she promised herself to keep that little page safe, not by hiding it from the world, but by teaching her son when to read it and when to remember. The evening came gently. Not like a curtain falling, but like a lantern slowly lit. Its warmth touched the windows first, then the alley, then the edge of the sky. In Ginny's home, the soft rattle of the rice pot lid signaled the close of another day. The grain steamed patiently as she folded away Minho's school shirt. His red scarf hung by the door. Crisp, pressed, and quiet. He sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through his lesson book, though he'd read the same page 3 times. If a bird flies away, and no one sees it, did it still leave? She looked up from the rice bowl she was shaping. "Yes," she said. "The tree knows." He nodded, as though this answered more than the question had asked. Later, after supper, Janae brought out the paper lantern. It was old, soft blue with faded white stars painted around its crown. The metal ring at the top had rusted slightly, and one edge was patched with thread, but it still opened with a gentle creak and folded into itself like a memory. Each year, she lit it for one night only. Not a holiday, not a rule, just a night when the moon felt closest. She set it on the windowsill and lit the stub of wax inside. Minho gasped softly as the paper sides glowed. "Can I touch it?" "Only with your eyes." The flickering glow danced over the walls, over the cloth-covered jars, the wooden stool, the portrait frames. It reached even into the quiet corners where their secrets rested. An old letter, a button wrapped in cloth, a book with one folded page. "By the window?" "Yes." Janae nodded. She brought him a pillow and tucked the blanket around his shoulders. He closed his eyes slowly, warmed by the soft hush of the lantern's breath. Outside, a dog barked once in the distance. Somewhere, a train rumbled softly past a station. The sound didn't carry far, but the earth noticed. They had hung it from the branch of the apricot tree and told stories by its light. One day, her sister had said, "Someone will light one of these for us, even if they don't know our names." Now, as Janae watched the glow flicker over her son's sleeping face, she thought, this is how names survive. In glow, in quiet, in care. She reached out and steadied the lantern's string as a gust passed by. It swayed once, then stilled. In the early hours, the wax gave way. The lantern dimmed and folded inward, cradling the darkness like a secret well kept. Janae did not relight it. Some lights, she knew, were meant only to be borrowed. Morning came, dressed in stillness, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, hell-breath kind, the kind that draped across rooftops and paused at every threshold, asking, "Are you ready?" Tomorrow was inspection day, and the village knew what that meant. Janae began before the sun. Her first movement was toward the portrait. The frame cloth had to be dusted, edges even, no tilt in the corner. She pressed it with her palms, then stepped back and bowed once, low and steady. The air smelled faintly of vinegar from the cleaned floorboards. Minho stirred quietly in bed. "Emma, is it today? Tomorrow?" she said. "But today is for making it look like it's always ready." He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. His red scarf lay neatly folded on the windowsill. Janae had pressed it with care the night before, until the crease was as sharp as her quiet determination. The bedding aired out and tightly folded. A single decorative towel was hung precisely on its nail. The cupboard doors, normally just closed, were now perfectly aligned. There was no room for almost. Minho practiced his greeting posture. Beside the stove, name, class, loyalty pledge. Janae watched him, not correcting, not praising, just making sure he remembered the rhythm. Because in this place, rhythm meant safety. If they ask what you ate, rice and pickles. If they ask what you read, loyalty lesson. And the words of the marshal, if they ask what you dream. He hesitated, then whispered, "Of being useful." She nodded once, and her throat tightened. That, too, was a kind of truth. The loudspeaker coughed into life. "Comrades, prepare for external verification. Stay home unless assigned. Smiles must be sincere. Pride must be visible." Janae closed the window gently after the message ended. The wind had begun to rise, carrying tiny specks of dry earth. She wet a rag and wiped down the sill again. Dust was a betrayal. Around noon, she stood in the doorway and looked across the alley. Other women were doing the same, sweeping already clean courtyards, retying scarf knots, adjusting the angle of chairs. No one spoke, but they all nodded slightly, like threads in the same fraying fabric. Mrs. O gave a faint wave, her hand pale in the light. Her shoes, freshly repaired, were placed neatly by the door. She mouthed something across the space. "Thank you." Janae just smiled. Small and quick. Too much kindness, even now, could seem like a signal. Best to keep it wrapped in silence. Minho spent the afternoon writing neatly in his school book, his back straight, tongue peeking slightly between his teeth as he focused. "Amma," he said, "if someone asks me about our house, what do I say?" She paused in folding his second shirt. "Say we are proud of our small life, even if we don't say it out loud, especially then." That night, she polished the water basin and lit the candle stub, letting the wax pool smoothly. Her fingers ached from scrubbing, but she said nothing. Minho was already asleep, his breathing slow and even. She sat near him, not touching, just watching, as though her gaze might shield him from questions tomorrow. On the wall, the family portrait hung level. The kettle was clean, the silence complete, and somewhere in that hush, she whispered a thought she dared not say aloud. Let them see only what they want. Let them overlook the rest. Because sometimes, survival was not just about truth. Sometimes, it was about quiet choreography, about a home that knew how to bow without breaking, about a mother who polished the world just enough to keep her son inside it. And when the candle flickered low, Janae let it go out naturally. Tomorrow, the light would come from other eyes. Tonight, it belonged only to them. The day began without birdsong. The air still, even the breeze seemed to wait behind the trees. Janae had already washed her hands 3 times before the knock came. 3 sharp raps. Not urgent, just official. She glanced at Minho, who had been sitting perfectly still in his corner, red scarf draped just so over his tunic. He nodded, once, as if to say, "I'm ready." She opened the door slowly. 3 men and 1 woman stepped inside, standard gray uniforms, small notebooks in their breast pockets, smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Household 48. Yes, comrade. The lead man, tall, his shoes polished to mere gloss, glanced once at the portrait on the wall. He ticked a box in his notebook. Let's proceed. They walked through the small home with practiced precision. The cupboard doors, the number of utensils, the stitching on the family photographs, cloth cover. What does the child eat for breakfast? One asked. Rice and pickles. And lunch. Sometimes barley soup, whatever is given. Does he enjoy the food? Minho stood quickly. Yes, Comrade Inspector. Very much. They nodded, barely looking at him. One of them opened a school book, flipped to the middle. The page Minho had folded was gone, replaced blank. Janae had burned it at dawn, her hand steady, her face still. Some truths could not live 2 days. His handwriting is neat, the woman said. Minho bowed slightly. Not too low, not too fast. His penmanship reflects loyalty, she added. Tick, 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 boxes were marked. Curt nods, passed like shadows. In the kitchen, they checked for excess. Too much rice. Suspicious. Too little. Janae had left 1 bowl of dried radish on the counter, just enough to suggest frugality with pride. They didn't comment, but one of them took a photo. Flash. And then gone. Finally, they stepped back to the doorway. The tall man closed his notebook. This house is in satisfactory condition. Thank you, comrade. Keep your child attentive. And remember, loyalty isn't just shown. It's lived. Yes, comrade. They turned and left without a backward glance. The door clicked closed behind them. Silence fell, heavy and immediate. Janae didn't move for a long moment. Then, finally, she let out the breath she'd been holding since dawn. Minho looked up. Did we do okay? Yes, little one, we did. Oh, he crawled into her lap and wrapped his arms around her waist. She didn't cry, but she did rest her chin on his head and closed her eyes. Later that evening, she poured hot water into a cup and sat by the window. The street was quiet again. Children had returned to play, cautiously at first, then louder as dusk fell. The inspections were over, and so the village began to breathe again, just a little. She looked at the scorched scrap of folded paper in the stove's ashes. The words had vanished, but the memory hadn't. Sometimes, she thought, the hardest part wasn't surviving the moment. It was remembering how to feel like you still existed afterward. The day after the inspection felt oddly weightless, not lighter, just empty, as though the village had exhaled all at once and now had nothing left to say. Janae rose early, out of habit more than need. She folded blankets with care, reheated barley porridge, and refilled the water basin. But her steps were slower, less careful, not careless, just tired. Outside, voices returned to the alley. Soft ones at first, then louder. The children played a familiar game, using pebbles and chalk lines. Their laughter hesitant but growing in strength. Minho stirred later than usual. His scarf was still folded by the windowsill, but today he left it there. "Amma," he said, rubbing his eyes. "May I wear my soft shirt today? You may." He changed into a cotton tunic, the blue one with the loose collar, and sat cross-legged beside the stove, resting his head on his knees. "I feel like my bones are quieter today," he mumbled. "That's because they were tense yesterday." Bones listened, too. The clouds arrived before dawn. They didn't roar in or darken the sky with anger. They simply gathered, quietly, like neighbors drawn to a whisper. By breakfast, a fine mist hung in the air, silver and soft, blurring the outlines of the hills beyond the village. Janae wrapped a scarf loosely over her hair and stepped out to sweep the front step. Though the rain would undo her work, she swept anyway. Inside, Minho sat by the window, knees pulled up to his chest, tracing raindrops as they raced down the glass. He counted them in a quiet voice, then gave up. "They're too fast today," he said. Janae nodded. That's how some days are. They don't want to be measured. With school suspended due to wet roads, Minho's day was his own. He brought out scraps of paper, pages from an old farmer's almanac, saved not for words, but for texture. From them, he began folding tiny cranes. "I want to make 100, he said. "Why 100? "Because I heard that if you do, you can make a wish." Janae smiled faintly as she kneaded dough at the table. "And what would your wish be?" He paused, looking down at the partly folded square in his hand. "That no one ever asks me what my wish is." She didn't respond, just reached over and smoothed the edge of his paper. Outside, the mist thickened into a soft drizzle. The village disappeared into layers of gray. Janae placed the dough into the steamer and let the room fill with warmth. The windows fogged gently, and the smell of yeast and rice hung like a comforter in the air. Minho asked again, carefully. "Yes, what's a lullaby?" "A song that says, 'I'm here, you're safe, sleep now.' Do you know one?" She nodded. "Can I hear it? If I sing it too loudly," she whispered, "someone might listen." He leaned closer. "Then whisper it." So she did. Not words, not melody, but the memory of both. A hum that rose and fell, like warm breath on a cold morning. Minho rested his head on her shoulder, still holding his half-folded crane. By noon, he had made 16, each crane slightly different, some with wide wings, others hunched like old men. Janae placed them gently along the edge of the windowsill. "They look like they're watching the rain," she said. "Maybe they're waiting for it to stop. Maybe they just like it." Minho smiled. "I like it." That afternoon, Janae mended a small tear in the lining of her coat. Her fingers moved slowly, rhythmically. Needle in, needle out. The stitches so fine they seemed invisible. Minho sat at her feet, drawing in a notebook. Not schoolwork, just lines that turned into hills, and circles that turned into hidden doors. His world, unfolding one pencil stroke at a time. "Do you ever miss things you've never had?" She didn't answer right away. "Sometimes," she said softly, "I think our hearts can imagine the shape of something, even if we've never touched it." In the evening, the rain softened into silence. No wind, no dripping, just stillness. The cranes sat peacefully on the windowsill. Minho fell asleep with his notebook still open beside him. A sketch of a bird flying toward a sun drawn with 12 rays, one for each month. Janae sat alone for a while. Then she reached for one of the cranes. Carefully, quietly, she unfolded its wings. In its center was a single word, written in his careful hand. "Stay." She refolded it, smoothed its back, placed it at the front of the flock. "I will," she whispered. And outside, in the darkened alley, a single drop fell, not from a cloud, but perhaps from a sky that remembered softness. The morning was still, the kind of stillness that made every movement feel louder than it was. Janae stepped softly through the narrow hallway. Today was for sorting. There was no official reason, no inspection, no visitor, just a whisper in her mind that said, "It's time." She opened the ladder to the attic, its wooden hinges creaking like an old voice, remembering how to speak. Minho stayed downstairs, peeling onions with exaggerated focus, but his ears tilted toward the ceiling. Janae climbed slowly, the dust brushing her sleeves, each step a quiet reunion with things long unseen. The attic smelled like old fabric and warm wood, a place that hadn't forgotten. Stacks of cloth, bundles, to worn boxers of shoes, and, wrapped in oilcloth, the treasure, her mother's sewing basket. She knelt and opened it. Inside, nestled among dull needles and buttons shaped like dried berries, was a roll of thread, deep crimson, unfaded. She touched it with reverence. "You kept color," she whispered. Back downstairs, Minho was waiting. "What did you find?" he asked, eyes wide. She held up the red thread between two fingers. "A memory." He tilted his head. "Of what?" "Of someone who once believed that red could live quietly." He looked at the spool with quiet awe. "Can we use it?" She smiled gently. "Only for something worth remembering." They decided to repair the blanket, the one Janae's mother had quilted by hand during her final winter. It had holes in 3 corners and a frayed edge from years of being pulled tight on cold nights, but it still held warmth. They spread it across the floor. Minho brought the patch squares. Janae brought her needle. Together, stitch by slow stitch, they worked in silence. "Why red?" Minho asked eventually. "Because it dares to be seen, even when we can't. Especially then, outside." The weather shifted. Clouds moved apart, revealing pale sunlight that crept across rooftops like a secret slipping free. The sewing continued. A loose button on the blanket's edge was replaced. A tear along a seam was closed, and one patch, just one, was stitched in red. It wasn't large, it wasn't loud, but it was enough. That evening, they laid the blanket across Minho's bed. He sat on it carefully, running his fingers over the stitched patch. "If someone asks, what do I say about the red thread? You say it was there when we needed it. And if they ask why, it's not the same color as the rest." She paused, then said, "You tell them. Not everything has to match to belong." Later, while Minho slept, Janae folded the sewing basket shut and placed it back on the attic steps. She didn't take it all the way up, just left it there, accessible. Maybe tomorrow, she thought. Maybe again, in a world where every thread was expected to blend. The red one had waited. It hadn't faded. It hadn't vanished. It had simply waited, and now it had found its place again. The evening came softly. A hush spread over the village, like cloth laid gently on a table. Lanterns flickered behind shuttered windows. The wind passed through empty alleys, like a breath that didn't want to be noticed. Inside their home, the stove glowed amber. Minho lay curled in his blanket, the red thread patch tucked near his heart. "Ama," he whispered, "tell me a story from when you were little." Janae sat beside him, rolling the corner of the blanket between her fingers. "I don't know if I remember how to tell that kind," she said. "Please." She hesitated, then leaned closer. "Only if you promise not to ask if it's true." He nodded solemnly, eyes wide. "And so she began. Once, when I was about your age, I lived with your grandmother in a house not much larger than this one, but our door faced a field of sunflowers. That field is gone now, but I still remember how the sun made it gold in the morning." Minho closed his eyes, picturing it. "There was a boy, my neighbor. His name was Kian. He never spoke loudly, not even when he laughed. But he had a way of looking at things that made you think he saw more than he said." "Was he your friend?" "Yes. Though we never called each other that. Just sat near the same trees, watched the same clouds." "What happened?" Janae paused. "One spring, he gave me a gift." "What kind?" "A dandelion, pressed between 2 pages of a magazine." Minho frowned. "That's not much." She smiled. "It was everything." She went quiet for a moment, the flame from the stove casting soft shadows across the wall. He said, "Some things don't survive because they're strong. They survive because someone hid them just long enough." "Did you hide the dandelion?" "Yes, for many years. It crumbled eventually, but I remember its color." Minho shifted under his blanket, voice barely above a breath. "What happened to Janae?" Looked into the orange coals. "One day, he stopped sitting by the trees. His family moved quickly. We were told not to ask where." "Did you ever see him again?" "No," Minho whispered. "That makes me sad." "Me too. But I keep him alive by remembering the way he looked at the sky. Like he was always searching for something kind." They sat in silence a while. The stove crackled. The house breathed slowly. Minho yawned and nestled deeper into the blanket. Do you think someone will remember me like that? Yes, Janae said softly, brushing hair from his brow. And will you tell my stories too? Only the ones I'm not supposed to tell. Those are the best ones, he murmured. Outside, the moon drifted behind a soft cover of mist. No footsteps passed the door. No radio hummed. Just the quiet sound of a child falling asleep and a mother remembering a boy with a pressed dandelion and a voice like folded paper. And for just a moment, Janae let herself believe that memory was a kind of freedom. A quiet rebellion made of petals and whispers. A story still alive. The next morning dawned quietly, pale gray, with only the soft chirp of sparrows on the roof tiles. Janae stirred the ashes in the stove, coaxing a few glowing embers back to life. Minho, already awake, sat cross-legged on the floor with his chin in his hands. He held a small folded paper. "Ama," he said with a grin. "You have a letter." "Do I?" "Yes. It's very important." He held it out with two hands, the way a postman might. The envelope was a scrap from an old flour sack, folded into neat corners and sealed with a bit of cooked rice paste. Janae accepted it with mock formality. "Shall I read it aloud?" "Please." She unfolded it, carefully straightening the creases. Inside, he had written, "Dear Amma, thank you for stitching the red patch. It made the blanket warmer, even if it's just my imagination. I think imagination might be like salt. We're not supposed to need it, but food tastes better when it's there. From your biggest listener." The kettle sat atop the stove, humming softly as it warmed. Minho was at school again. A short day, a rote day. He had packed his notebook, his inkless pen, and a folded paper craned for luck. Janae remained behind, alone, not lonely, just quiet. She swept the floor with her usual calm rhythm. Dust curled into corners. Crumbs clung to the broom's edge. She paused to tuck a loose hair behind her ear, then continued. Each movement felt ceremonial. Pour the water. Wipe the sill. Check the latch on the window. Small tasks. But each was a way to say, "I'm still here." She sat for a while beside the window, watching the steam curl from her teacup. The tea was thin today. Barley and nothing more, but warm enough to soften her throat. She thought of her mother's voice, faint but certain, telling her, "There are two kinds of silence, the kind that protects and the kind that buries." She did not yet know which one she was living in. Around noon, she mended a shirt, Minho's school tunic. The elbow had thinned again. She stitched slowly, deliberately. Not because she lacked thread. But tonight, it was everything. The sky was still dark when Janae woke. The horizon had not yet softened. The stars were still visible, tiny pulses of light, like old songs still being sung. She rose slowly, pulling the blanket gently from Minho's shoulders and tucking him back in. His hand twitched once, not from a dream, but from the body's quiet agreement to keep resting. She moved about the home silently, placed a kettle on the stove, tied her hair back with a soft ribbon, folded the blanket at the edge of the bed. Each action was a gesture of faith. Faith that the world, even one like this, could be tended to gently. She opened the door, just as the first pale blue light touched the rooftops. The alley was still, but in that stillness, she saw things no one would have spoken of. A new chalk mark on the brick wall near the gate, a cracked flower pot, carefully a stone placed deliberately at the corner of the stair. These were messages, silent, ordinary messages passed between the villagers without words. No one had to say, "I'm here, I saw, we're okay," because these things had already been said. Inside, Minho stirred and stretched. "Is it a school day?" he asked sleepily. "Yes," she replied. "Then I want to wear my shoes with the green laces, of course." He sat up, rubbing his eyes. Is it okay that I like Scooey? Even if I don't believe everything, it's okay to listen and choose what stays in your heart, even if they want all of it to stay, especially then." Breakfast was simple. Warm rice with pickled radish and a single egg shared between them. They ate quietly, with the window open just enough to let in the breath of the day. As Minho packed his bag, Janae slipped a small note into the front pocket. It was not a letter, not anything that could be questioned, just a folded drawing. One crane, flying low over a mountain, the sun behind it glowing softly. "You ready?" she asked. "I'm always ready," he smiled. "That's because you carry quiet like armor." He nodded, and she kissed the top of his head. "Go gently." After he left, Janae stood at the door a long time. She didn't weep. She didn't sigh. She simply breathed, listened to the leaves rustling, watched a bird pick its way along the alley wall, heard the soft shuffle of someone sweeping nearby. Later, she would do laundry. Later, she would peel radish and mend socks. But for now, she just stood in the threshold of her own small world. A woman, a home, a silence filled with meaning. No paratus, no rebeat, no thunder, only the everyday rhythm of survival, which, in a place like this, is a kind of revolution all its own. The rain had returned by mid-morning, soft and drizzling, like someone whispering secrets to the earth. Janae was in the attic again. Not to search, not to hide, just to be. The rafters creaked faintly under her step. She traced a beam with her fingertips, brushing off dust that smelled of pine and thyme. As she moved aside a stack of old textiles, something shifted behind the slats. A dry, hollow flutter, paper carefetter. She pulled it free. It was a small diary, wrapped in linen. The string had frayed away, but the folds had preserved the inside, like a pressed flower. Its cover was blank. No name, no title, just a faded grain of old rice paper. She opened the first page. The handwriting was uneven but careful. A girl's, maybe, a boy's. She couldn't tell. She read silently. "Today we were told to write about the leader's greatness, but instead I wrote about the wind. It was strong this morning and pushed my hair into my eyes. It felt real. The assignment did not." Ginny's breath slowed. She turned another page. "I watched my mother sew a coat today." She stitched slowly, like the needle carried something heavier than thread. Maybe she hides her thoughts in the seams. Maybe that's why the jacket feels safe. Janae didn't know who had written these pages. The diary was dated 16 years ago, before Minho was born, but every word echoed like it had been whispered just this morning. The final entry made her pause. "If someone finds this, I hope they read it slowly. I hope they feel less alone, even if they can never say why." She closed the diary gently. "I found it," she whispered. "And I did." She placed the diary in the basket with the sewing threads and her own letters. Not to bury it, but to fold it into the small archive of memories she had built quietly over the years. Later that afternoon, Minho returned early from school. A teacher had caught a cough, and classes were dismissed. He tossed his shoes off and flopped onto the blanket with a red patch. "Is it okay if we don't talk today?" he asked. They sat together in companionable silence, the stove murmuring beside them. Janae brought out the diary and held it for a moment. Then, without speaking, passed it into his hands. He opened to a page at random, read a few lines, and smiled. "It sounds like someone we know," he said. "Yes," she replied, "but it could be anyone, or everyone." That night, before bed, Minho copied one line into his notebook. Not for school, not to recite, but because it mattered. We stitched ourselves into the quiet. Then he folded the page twice, tucked it into his box of paper cranes, and said softly, "If I forget, this will remember for me." Janae sat up a little longer that night. She lit a small candle, watched its flame hold steady, thought of all the people in the village, past and present, who had lived entire lives within the silence. Some still here, some vanished, but none forgotten. Not if someone remembered how to listen. The morning arrived unnoticed. There was no bird song or sunbeams, just a hush that comes after a long rain. The earth was damp and still. The alley smelled of clean stone and soot. A single drop slipped from the eaves, landed in a puddle and vanished. Inside the house, Janae sat by the stove. The flame burned low and steady, like it had been awake all night. Her son, Minho, stirred quietly in his sleep. There was no school today. No announcement had come. They didn't always. But Janae knew. You could feel when a village was holding its breath. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside. The air was cool, damp, and incredibly clear. Along the alley wall, someone had drawn a small chalk circle. Not a mark of danger or warning, just a symbol, soft, smudged, like someone saying, "I'm here to..." And as Janae stood there tracing the shape with her fingers, she felt a new kind of hope bloom in her chest, the quiet, steady strength of simply existing.